Shalom guys, welcome back to another episode here at YASHAV Ministries with YASHAV. Thank you for being there. Like I always say, if you like the content that we are putting up in our channel, like, subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, put on the comment section down below. So this week we're going to continue with the weekly Torah portions. We have Torah portion Vayeshev, and it starts the story of Joseph. We have been obviously going through the patriarchs and their narrative when it comes to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now we're going to enter a very turning point in the story with Joseph and the brothers and the sons of Jacob, and a lot of lessons that we can learn from this family and their journey as in morality, but also prophetic elements to the story too. So if we pay attention, we will learn and find a lot of riches in this story. So let's get to Torah portion Vayeshev, okay? And like I said, it is in Genesis 37 verse 1 to Genesis 40 verse 23. The Haftorah or the prophets portion is Amos chapter 2 verse 6 to chapter 3 verse 8. And the Brit Hadashah or New Testament portion is John chapter 4 verse 1 through 38. Last week's Torah portion, Vayishlach, recounted how Jacob had wrestled with a mysterious angel or man before returning to the promised land to be reconciled with his brother Esau. No longer named Jacob, heel holder of Esau, but Yisrael, prince of God, or one that prevails with God. A transformed Jacob finally returned to Hebron to see his father Isaac, nearly 34 years after he had left home. However, on the way back home, his beloved wife Rachel died while giving birth to his 12th son Benjamin. This week's Torah portion begins with Jacob living back in the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and with his 12 sons. But the narrative quickly turns to Jacob's favorite son, Joseph, who has 17 years old at the time. The Torah states that Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons since he was the son of his old age, and he was the firstborn son of his beloved wife, Rachel. Indeed, Jacob made him an ornament tunic to indicate his special status. And so this is part of the most important element of this story, which is Rachel is the love of Yaakov's life. She's the one that he went to get. Obviously, as we know the story, he gets tricked by Laban, and he receives Leah first. And then he has to work 7 more years for Rachel. But Rachel is the love of his life. He passes away, and the son that she can give him is Joseph. And he clings to that love for her as the love of his life and their firstborn of their unity. And so here we have the story of Jacob receiving a cloak, which is a very symbolic element. It says many colors. Some say is white. I think the most important description of this tunic is that is up to his wrist and his ankles, meaning that he wore a robe that was of privilege, or a robe that the firstborn or the oldest carrying the promise and the responsibility would wear. So Joseph, the youngest, is recognized as the responsible one. Okay, so let's continue. As we read this story, we observe history and meditate on it, and we learn from our human behavior. This story is very important. Genesis 37, this is a review from a couple years ago. Verse 1 and 2 says, Jacob dwelt in the land where his father had dwelt, in the land of Canaan. This is the story of Jacob's family, Vayeshev, and he dwelt, right? Vayeshev is primitive rubis YASHAV, which is to sit correctly, specifically as a judge or in ambush or quietly. By implication, to dwell, remain, to marry, or casually, right? So this is close to the name of our ministry, YASHAV. We dwell and we abide in the presence of God and study his words. Okay? Joseph here, sorry for the typo, was a pastor with his brothers and was his helper or their helper. Joseph, Genesis 37 verse 2 says, Joseph being 17 years old grazed the sheep with his brothers, and the young man was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph informed his father of their bad reputation, right? So Joseph is recognized or traditionally known as a tattletale, or somebody that will tell on his brothers, and usually, like I said before, we see that in a negative sense, but in reality he's doing the right thing, right? He's looking after his father's name and image and inheritance, and he's bringing respect to the family in order, just like a firstborn would, right? Upholding the promise given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so it's very important to know how Joseph represents this. Now, 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 22 says, do not rush to lay your hands on anyone, lest you become an accomplice in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. There's a lesson that is in the New Testament, but is a lesson that we need to learn from the brothers of Joseph. Joseph did not find his brothers around Shechem. A man informed them that they had moved to Dothan. When Joseph approached his brothers near Dothan, they recognized him in the distance because of his elegant cloak. They began to plot how they might get rid of this troubling dreamer and his threatening dreams, since his ancient believed that dreams held the future. The most effective way to put an end to an undesirable future foreshadowed by dreams was to put an end to the dreamer himself. The brothers plotted to kill Joseph and dispose of him by throwing his body into one of the cisterns dotted the hill country of Canaan, right? So now we have jumped past a lot of points, right? So in this case, Joseph tells on his brothers. After that, he doesn't obviously obtain a great fame for that. And after he has dreams. Now in the dreams, he starts to inform his family about the dreams, but he is not interpreting the dreams. He's just telling them, this is what I dreamt. But they, when they hear the dream, they feel a level of jealousy or envy or guilt or a negative energy towards Joseph because of the dream he had. But if you read the narrative, Joseph never gives an interpretation of the dreams. He just informs the family of the dream he had. And so in the dreams, when they saw themselves in the dream, they recognized the dream as a negative thing against them and in favor of Joseph. So they believed that Joseph was trying to put himself over them. But in reality, Joseph was just being a vehicle and a vessel to give God's message. And in the gift that God gave Joseph was the dreams. And so once Joseph goes to look for his brothers, they plot to kill him and hurt him. And before they decide to kill him, they say, let's not kill him, but let's sell him. Okay, so that is a dramatic story in a way for Joseph. A good young man doing the right thing, representing his father's honor, protecting his father's honor, protecting his brothers from doing the wrong thing, from sinning, from disobedience. And because he was honest, humble, vulnerable, responsible, obedient, they try to kill him. And so it's very important. All right, this story, it's teaching us a lot how if we are not conscious of our iniquities or sins, or if we're not conscious of our limitations or the parts that we need to work on, because the jealousy of the older brothers towards Joseph is not justified, because Reuben sins against his father. Simeon and Levi sin against their father. Judah sins. And so these older brothers are not morally pure to represent the family and the promise of Abraham. And you have Joseph doing his best. And so he is sold and he is sent to Egypt. And that's where we will begin this week. Now, Genesis 39 verse 1 and 2 say, Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. And it's interesting because the story of Joseph is one that always reminds us that God was with Joseph and he prospered him. But it doesn't express Joseph's reaction to the betrayal, right? He weeps, he asks for help for his brothers, but anytime that the decision is made against him, Joseph never confronts or speaks out. There is a continuous line through the narrative that Joseph is just being a servant, an obedient servant in silence, and God is prospering him in that path. Okay, so to think of the contrast between Joseph and his brothers. The brothers were not sold as slaves and slept in their own beds among their own families. Joseph was a slave, but he was free. The brothers were free, but slaves to secrets, shame, and guilt. And this is very interesting because it highlights a lot of Yeshua, Jesus, and how the same way that Joseph here, as the firstborn, even though he's the youngest and came after the other brothers, he has been given the cloak of authority and responsibility because he is responsible. He points out what is wrong. He doesn't hide sin, and he wants to bring order and start to establish what is called integrity. Joseph demonstrates integrity. And so the same way that Joseph demonstrated integrity and honor, when he did that, his brothers betrayed him. The same way Yeshua, Jesus, when he showed integrity and honor and obedience like Joseph, he was betrayed. But it will seem as if Joseph is a slave, and as if Jesus was a slave and found this despicable or despised by men. But both of Joseph and Yeshua are graced by God. Okay, and so let's continue. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptians because Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph's charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took a notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater than this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you were his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand, and he went out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand, he ran out of the house. She called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me." But I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of this house. She kept the cloak beside her until his master came home. And then she told him the story. "The Hebrew slave you brought us came to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him, put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in the charge of all of those who held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And this is what I'm talking about, right? And we read a lot, but we see the narrative. Joseph is brought as a slave into Potiphar's home. And when he enters as a slave, because he is in service of God, he obtains favor in the eyes of men. And because Joseph's integrity is so flawless, he is put in charge of Potiphar, the official's home. So basically, in Potiphar's house, Joseph is the closest thing to Potiphar. And he has all the authority. He's second in command. And he is responsible. Hence, Potiphar says, "You run my home." And so when Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph's integrity is highlighted, not that he is loyal to Potiphar. He is loyal to God, because he recognizes that him breaking the lines of morality and integrity by touching Potiphar's wife, he's not sinning against Potiphar. In his eyes, he's sinning against God. And so when Joseph served Potiphar or served anybody, he served them as he was serving God, which is tough. It's a tough lesson to learn, because it is hard for us. And I admit it, it's hard to serve men knowing their iniquity, their disabilities or inconsistencies. But you still have to serve, not men, serve God, and see men as the vehicle of service, recognizing that they are in the image of God. And what you do to them is as if you're doing it to the Father in heaven, which is a very important lesson that Joseph teaches us, that integrity, that maturity. And even when he's accused wrongfully again by lies, as he goes into judgment, he is still favored by God. And he is prospered even in the lowest moments of his life, because he stayed consistent to his responsibility and morality of pure integrity. So let's continue. Now, let's go to John 4. And we will do a jump. It's going to be a big jump, but I hope that it makes sense. So, in the story of Joseph, we see that Joseph is 17 years old, responsible, attentive. He has integrity. He highlights sin and disobedience when it comes to his brothers, but he's also gifted with dreams. God favors him. God protects him because he is someone that can be trusted with the responsibility of Abraham's promise. In you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And Joseph becomes that vehicle by being used. No matter the circumstances, he stayed consistent and recognized God above everything. And so in this story, we have Joseph, the son of the promise, because he is part of the descendancy of Isaac and of Jacob. And he is given the cloak of authority. So he is the chosen one to continue the promise. But he is kicked out by his brothers. And in the strange land, he consistently represents that promise. No matter if he was at home with the family of Jacob or if he was in Egypt, he still represented God. He honored God, and God was with him because he stayed true to God's words. Okay? And so, with that being said, let's go to John 4. It says, therefore, the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself was not baptizing, but his disciples were. He left Judea and went away again into Galilee. He had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. And Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Therefore the Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. And this is interesting because it is key, right? There is a separation between Jews and Samaritans. There's a big separation between Israel in the promise and the Egyptians. Now, we will see the connection that makes the story of Joseph, understanding that even though he's the promised part of the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he has been ripped off the land of promise and sent into Egypt. And in Egypt, even though Egyptians and Hebrews are not common foes or friends, Joseph is able to make a connection, and he is found honorable and with integrity. And now Jesus is in the same spot. He is away from the land that is Jerusalem, Judea, but he's in Samaria, which is still part of the promised land. But there's a division. So how do we bring unity? That is key. Let's continue. Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you will have asked him, and he will have given you living water. She said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with. The well is deep. Where then you get the living water? You are not greater than our father Jacob, are you? Who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle? Jesus answered and said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give them shall never thirst. But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so I will not be thirsty no more. Come all the way here to draw. He said to her, go call your husband and come here. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, you have correctly said, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. This you have said truly. The woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Women, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in the mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You will worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, and now it is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming. He's also called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare all things to us. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. At this point, his disciples came, and they were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman. Yet no one said, What do you seek? Or what do you speak with her? So the woman left her water pot and went into the city and said to the men, Come see, a man who told me all things that I have done. This is not the Messiah, is it? They went out of the city and were coming to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. Now, this is important because there's a division, Samaritans, Jews, and Jesus is confronting this Samaritan woman. Because in a Samaritan's faith, what they believe is the mountain of Mount Ebal and Gerizim, which is the 2 mountains that are where the blessings and the curses are proclaimed. That's where their worship will be, and where their temple will be, and where the manifestation of everything will be. And that the prophets and everything else that came afterwards is not relevant to them. The only thing that's relevant to the Samaritan is the 5 books of Moses. That's why Yeshua says, you have had 5 husbands, and you have him now, and he's not yours, because he is of the Jews. And he says, you guys worship what you don't know. We worship what we do know. Why? Because salvation is of the Jews. But the hour is coming where the true worshipers are going to worship in spirit and in truth. Now, this is key. And you will say, Alex, what does this have to do with Joseph? Because remember, Joseph is in Egypt, and he's worshiping in spirit and in truth. And the key of Joseph's story is that people are going to thirst and people will be hungry. Because those are the dreams that Joseph is having. And you might say, Alex, why are you spoiling the story? I'm just letting you know that is what's going to happen. The woman is looking for water, and she believes that the well is the most important element to give water, because she says Jacob was the one that built this well and his descendants drank of this well. So are you greater than him who had the promise and was the chosen one in that moment in time? And Jesus says, the one that gave favor upon Jacob and his ascendancy is the one that's giving you waters, my Father in heaven. Okay, so you will say again, Alex, what does Joseph have to do with Yeshua right now? Well, remember the story of Joseph. Even though we're at Potiphar's house and he is in prison, the dreams that he's having about his brothers and his family, and the dreams that he will interpret next week, have to do with thirst and famine, and also abundance. But abundance is only tied to the instructions of God. And so let's continue. So meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. So the disciples were saying to one another, no one brought him anything to eat, did he? Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white for harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for eternal life, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this case, the saying is true, one sows, another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. So this is key. In Yeshua, Jesus is quoting, let me see if I can look it up for you guys right here. Yeshua is quoting Joshua 24 verse 13 says, I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive carts that you did not plant. Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in his sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. So Yeshua is saying that the ultimate work, the ultimate provision that the disciples depended on was the words of God, the instructions of God, and those that needed God. Let me say that again. Yeshua is saying to the disciples that when they were preoccupied with food, physical food, and preoccupied with him eating physical necessary food, of course, Jesus is saying, I am eating, but I'm eating the food that is only obtained by instructions of the Father and fulfilling the will of the Father. And I am full when I serve those that need my Father and need the instructions of my Father. You guys are waiting to pick up the harvest 4 months from now. But if you look out into the field, there's people that are in need. And if you feed them, if you plant on them the words of God, you will reap now. And you will say, Alex, what does that have to do with Joseph? Joseph did that exactly. Before Joseph was able to put into action the dream, which was prepare Egypt for the famine, which was building storages of food and water. Before he was able to do that, he had to have the instructions. Before he had to do that, he had to live in integrity and faithfulness, not worshiping the gods of the Egyptians, not living in total anger and resentment, but living according to what God had instructed him through his fathers and obeying the instructions of God. And that fed Joseph and kept him alive and preserved him. And because he was able to do that, he was able to be a blessing and a salvation to many nations that were in need in that time of famine. The same way that the Samaritan woman was worried about a physical well, Jesus is saying, I have the one who has living waters. And I live by the instructions of the one that can feed me and sustain me. But the key to our service is our integrity. Just like Joseph told us am I going to sin against God? What we consider Joseph staying away from Potiphar's wife, Joseph called it sinning against God. Jesus was conscious. Joseph was conscious. Integrity and faithfulness will preserve us. Obedience, love, consistency, commitment will protect us. We have to have the Father. The Father is the food that we want and the water that we need. And everything else will follow suit. So, that's all I got for this week. I hope it makes sense. Remember, the parallels, the connections are always consistent if you're truly looking for truth. The truth will set you free. Joseph was a slave, but he was free because he had the truth. Yeshua was a slave, but he was free because he had the truth. In our perception, they were slaves. In God's perception, they were free and full of grace. So, have a great week. Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.